This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Very, very busy episode of The Baseline. Could be somber. Could be, as what the Mexicans call, the Day of the Dead. But we're going to put in some double work, man, because a lot has happened in the last 48 hours. But as always, man, always great to do it with my right-hand man, brother from another brother, my brother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, Mr. Shaw? How are you feeling? What was that movie? I think it was our generation. It's called Flatliners. Is that real interesting? You know what I'm saying? Noir type.
Yeah. You know, it's always real somber, you know, when you're in this line of work and then you have to go and, you know, bury somebody you love. And, you know, that day has come upon us, you know, here on the Baseline NBA podcast, as our beloved, you know, is one of the teams that will be autopsied this afternoon. So it's a really, really somber note, but the job must be done. The show must go on. We need to do the thing that we would ordinarily do for any other team, despite the displeasure that I'm going to take into.
I'm actually, well, see, you have level of displeasure for this, but I actually am very intrigued. Like, I am fascinated. It's one of it's like one of those mad villains. It's like, you know, I don't know if I should feel bad, but I am fascinated on where we might allow this to go, because there's so many different directions that could be taken from what transpired. And I think one thing is definitely for certain, Shaw. The Eastern Conference has proven to us yet again that you're going to have more questions than answers about these teams and the way that these teams were eliminated. So if people are not cluing in, clearly our autopsy is going to be covering the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers. No surprise there. But it's also going to elevate the questions on the validity of how strong these teams are. Because if you really think about it, Shaw, in this generation, I don't think you can honestly say that there is a dynastic franchise in the making anytime soon. Now, we can deliberate between what's going to cause that, what's triggering that, what the effect of that is. But I can honestly say that when you look at the talent of the rosters, it's hard for me to imagine that there is such fragility and lack of sustainability in the evolution of greatness in some of these teams that have been constructed. And I don't know if it's because of the players themselves, if it's the organization, or if it's because of what other teams are doing in order to strategically counter the style of play or the culture of how that team operates within. Again, it's something that can extend itself on, but if you want two legitimate test cases for us to have to question whether or not there's another run left in these teams if you kept them as is, I challenge you to say whether or not that will or will not be the case. And I think this is what we're going to be speaking to in our edition of the Baseline this week.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of different threads to kind of to pull on for both of these teams. Two of the elite teams in the Eastern Conference in terms of record, and then what expectations were going into the playoffs. And I think the playoffs themselves are weird because as I think you're indicating, the aspect of truly building dynasties is really hard. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think primarily in the case of Boston is going to be the aspect of the finances. You end up being a second apron team. You're paying X amount of dollars. Can you keep this team together? You know, when it's going to cost you literally double and triple the actual salaries that you're paying out just because of the punitive taxes that are involved in there too. So Adam Silver's NBA is upon us, as many on X have said. You know, parity is here in the NBA in a very, very real way. And yeah, there's some conversation whether that's good or not. But two really struggling. Two teams that really struggled here in the second round and ultimately were eliminated. And as we're recording, we don't know the outcome of a Game 7 for the number one team in the NBA, you know, with the Oklahoma City Thunder as well too. So by the time this comes out, we will have that answer, whether or not they get to move on. But really interesting that teams that were dominant in the regular seasons are now kind of falling to the middle of the pack, if you will, in terms of the regular season, which also means maybe the regular season doesn't matter as much as we thought it does.
Yeah. So a lot of interesting, you know what I'm saying, threads to pull at Very excited for us to be able to kind of dig into that. Unfortunately, at the expense of our team, as one of those teams that we're putting on the slab this week in the autopsy report. And then also, it's important, man. We got to cover the Eastern Conference Finals, right? The ECF is now been set between the Indiana Pacers and the New York Knicks. So we'll kind of give our perspective on that and give our takes about who's going to advance to the NBA Finals as a representative of the Eastern Conference. So a lot to get into. As always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. Be sure to get on my man Shaw at the Warren Shaw, and you can get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. You can go to www.thebaselineNBA.com in order to check out not just this episode, but also all of the episodes that we got rolling out. And if you're catching us on the YouTube channel and you see the blue and white logo down in the middle of the screen, you know that we rocks with the 19 Media Group family. So we'd like to say hello to you and yours, so our visual listeners. And you can always check out the great content of creators that are lined up with the 19 Media Group family. Go to www.19mediagroup.com to not only check us, but the family of great content creators that have been rolling out, been doing their thing as part of the 19 Media family only does. So before we get into our digs of the coveted autopsy report, it's time that we got to pay them bills, man. And if you are somebody who is down with the Prize Picks package, I know you're ready to ante up again, man, because it's live and it's happening. The basketball playoffs certainly are here, and the action has been heating up as it is on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sports. Don't miss your last chance to add your favorite players from the court to your Prize Picks lineup. Whether it's points, rebounds, assists, take your pick of more or less for your shot to win at 2,000 times your cash. That's right, I said 2,000 times your cash. Download the app and use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks is also offering weekly promotions. Turn your playoff hot takes into tickets to the Basketball Championship Series. Every lineup you make will qualify for the Takes 2 Tickets sweepstakes, which will get you and your guests a VIP trip to the chip. Every Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts several projections on the board, usually between 15 and 25%. They also offer Flex Fridays. Make sure you opt in and tap the checkbox in your lineup builder to be eligible for the protected play. Choose squares from any game on the board. If your lineup doesn't win, you'd get your net losses back in promo funds up to your promo limit as soon as the lineup settles. You can also mix your selections across sports in your Prize Picks lineup. I might take Juan Soto for 2 RBIs and the big bodega, Karl Anthony Towns, for more than 26 points to combine my love of basketball and baseball. Prize Picks is simply the best way to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today with the promo code CLNS to get $50 after you play your first $5 lineup. The baseline is rocking with Prize Picks, and you should too. Prize Picks, run your game. Coming up, Sean and I put the teams on the slab. It's time for them autopsy report. Don't miss it here on the baseline. We are back. Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. Time now for us to do the coveted autopsy report. And the first team that we're going to put on the slab, Shaw, is going to be the reigning defending champions. I figured, it was interesting. I was saying to myself, should we start with the Cavs or should we start with the Celtics? And I think it's only right that we start with the Boston Celtics, not because they were the last team to get knocked out as part of our discussion for the autopsy report, but they are the defending champions. And I think that there's a lot of threads that have to be pulled at when you look at the Boston Celtics, because if you go back a year, right, I think a lot of people questioned the validity of the championship that the Boston Celtics won. Now, I'm not questioning it. And I know you weren't questioning it, but we were certainly not going to go out on a limb and say, oh, among the great Boston Celtics teams, you were among one of the greatest. They may have put up really impressive numbers, right? Numbers that for this generation may spark some kind of a debate about how legitimately great they could have been, right, in comparison to others. But I think in the grand scheme of things, we understood this was a well-built team built to win today's NBA championship, okay? They literally had a counter for every team that was out there, if and when healthy. I think going into this season, however, we really wanted to find out the level of greatness that this team can possibly ascend to. And it wasn't a question of whether or not they were going to win another championship for us to have that conversation. I think it was a question of how dominant could they be in the regular season, and how dominant can they be against any of the teams that we all still had question marks about who would actually still be able to compete and legitimately hang with the Boston Celtics. And I think we focus a lot of attention on teams on the Western Conference because that was a toss-up more so than what we were worrying about with the Boston Celtics. But I think as we watch this regular season play out, Shaw, it was very evident that the Boston Celtics clearly were not the team of last year. And I don't think that they clearly are the team that I think a lot of people thought that with the evolution of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, that this is the equation of that dynamic duo that will be the building block of multiple championships, moving forward. I think a lot of that now has been brought to light because of the way the Boston Celtics performed in this playoff run.
I mean, where to start with this organization that, by most people's accounts, was at least had the second best odds of winning the NBA championship. So the playoffs started, and there was something that wasn't quite right. So I don't want to get lost in my own sauce because there's a lot to unpack here, right? Let me even go before the playoffs. The regular season ended, and they were looking kind of like themselves from last year. They finished the season kind of regularly dominant, if you will. But there were times in the season you're like, they don't look quite right, but they're the champs. Don't worry about them. They'll turn it on. They'll turn it on. They'll turn it on. I think they took the Knicks too lightly. And I think we can't have this conversation without crediting New York for what they were able to do in coming back in the first two games, and then ultimately putting the nail in the coffin in an emphatic way in Game 6. But the Celtics seem to take their regular season success against New York to some level of advantage, and they took it for granted. And then in those first two games got basically surprised, and now we're playing from behind on their heels. And then you put yourself in a position where you're having not necessarily to play harder, because you're always playing hard in the playoffs, but there's a lot of stress now in trying to do what you were trying to do in terms of repeating. Tatum goes down, unfortunately now for a very, very long time, with the Achilles injuries. And then, they have a great showing, if you will, in terms of some pride in Game 5, but ultimately just get waxed and mollywopped in Game 6. To me, where Boston struggles here now is in the terms of their longevity of who they ultimately want to become, because the questions is like, well, is Mazzulla really a great coach? Has now come back up. Can you keep this team together is ultimately kind of coming up. Is Jaylen Brown that guy at $50 million? Everything is now in flux, when last year we were like, hey, this is a great team that might be on a 2 or maybe even 3-year run. That timeline now is absolutely thrown out the window. It is branched off into some ugly multiverse situation here now that not even Brad Stevens could have predicted was going to take place.
Yeah. I'm not going to give them a pass for what they did in this playoff series with the New York Knicks, but I am not going to lean in on this was the only incident that we've seen regarding this Boston Celtics team. I'm gonna go on this off because you know how I am about this. I've been about this life when it comes to what wins championships. And people can sit here and argue with me up and down. We can agree to disagree on certain things. I understand the goal is to score the basketball, but the other goal as well too is to prevent the other team from scoring more points than you. And if you have already established that you're scoring more points than the other team, it is your role to ensure to win the game that at the end, that team doesn't score more points than you. Okay. So we can sit here and we can, act like this isn't something that hasn't been a trend with the Boston Celtics, but you and I have been distressed about what we've seen from this Boston Celtics team going back to last year. This innate ability to look like you're going to go out and, to use your terminology you just used, mollywop teams, establish 23, 24, 25-point leads. And then suddenly, between the third and the fourth quarter, you allow a team to suddenly find their way. It's almost as if they stop scoring the basketball, they lose all sense of self. And I've been saying this even from when they win that championship against the Dallas Mavericks. The road to their prosperity wasn't going to be about how statistically nice they look and shooting the threes and everything. It was what they were doing defensively. And I'm saying this now, Shaw, because this is why I think it's creeping up about questioning whether or not this team can stay together. I think the elixir that the Celtics afforded themselves having was a real great floor general in a Drew Holiday, going out there and leaning on the things that he knew the Celtics needed to keep consistent and elevate in order for them to give themselves a chance to win that championship. You saw Drew Holiday this season take a step back. I think by all accounts, Derek White took a step back defensively. And I think the Celtics as a team, even though the numbers may speak to that they were still like a top 5 team defensively, we could use defensive rating and all that stuff. Shaw, nothing excuses you putting a 20-point mark on a team, and then you go into the second half and you inherently lose the third and fourth quarter because you stopped defending. Not that you stopped scoring, you stopped defending. And that is my big
both. Like they did stop defending and stop scoring.
But I think it's connective, Shaw. I think once the shots are no longer falling for them, and listen, this is very reminiscent of what we've seen with the Golden State Warriors during their heyday. They stopped scoring the basketball, and it's all of a sudden they just stopped stopping teams. It wasn't as if, when you were shooting the lights out of the place, that you completely demoralize a team. If a team figures out a way that they can start scoring the basketball, it has to be that defensively you are, I guess, imposing your will. And I just saw that this Celtics team lacked that level of imposing their will defensively. They leaned too much on the fact that if we drop them down, drop 23 pointers on them, they'll just kind of fade away into the sunset. And to your point, you play against a team like the New York Knicks, who are realistically, as good as they are offensively, they are a slow momentum gathering offensive team. They don't find their mark until they get to those middling second quarter, third quarters. And to me, I think it was egregious on Joe Mazzulla's part to not point out to that Celtics team, when you're playing against teams like that, you have got to win the third quarter. I'm going to leave it at that part because I know that there's more that we want to go at this. But if you really look at this across the board, Shaw, and I'm going to harken this back to when the Celtics during the 08 to the 012 seasons, what killed them from winning those championships when they played against the better teams, they did not win the third quarter. They lost the third and eventually evened out or lost the fourth quarter. And you cannot afford to do that against teams in the playoffs. And if you practice those habits in the regular season, they will doom to repeat and haunt you in the most critical times, which in this case would be the playoffs.
Boston is going to, maybe they'll take the higher road, and I'm not going to let them off the hook either. But inevitably, this is not a healthy team. And you needed health and you needed luck. And we said going into this that Porzingis needed to be healthy. They weren't going to be able to fly through the playoffs without a Porzingis like they did last year. I don't know what is going on, with his respiratory infection, the long COVID, whatever it is. But he was a literal walking zombie out there on the floor that was unable
he was
to
a liability. Anything. Absolute liability.
Then there's the aspect of Jaylen Brown's knee. And so there's things schematically that I'm going to struggle with, understanding. But if Jaylen is not healthy, and yes, he's raising his hand because he is the guy, the $55-60 million guy now, especially with Tatum down, his ability to try to slow down on Jalen Brunson is not what it was. One, because he's now compromised. Two, because Jalen Brunson is a different type of shifty than Luka Doncic was last year. Luka is obviously bigger, doesn't have as much bounce and wiggle. Jalen Brunson's stop and go is just like it's very hard for somebody who's going to be taller, and maybe not less as mobile. And I thought that was, while I commend Mazzulla and Brown for maybe at least wanting to try to do that, I don't know that was the right matchup. But White was also getting cooked. Holiday was also getting cooked. So let me finish, because it also leads me into the aspect that Mazzulla doesn't have a counter. They didn't have a zone to kind of fall back into to try to force New York to do something else. They just said, this is what we know. This is what we do. And the difference from this year to last year is that even in that series, like, yes, they shot a bunch of threes last year, but Tatum obviously is a big part of what they did last year. But they stopped shooting threes and started going to the basket and had better ways, in essence, to counter defensively, even if they were sticking in man-to-man. Those things didn't exist for them this year because of the injuries, and they just didn't really know what to do once what they did all the time wasn't no longer available to them and no longer effective.
Okay, so I didn't want to interrupt you, Shaw, but I wanted to make sure, because when you got to the point about Drew Holiday, I think to me that is also key, because I think last year the Boston Celtics, again, I say this not to say can they find their way back if everyone is essentially healthy, possibly. I think the caveat here, to your point, is Kristaps Porzingis. But I'm going to harken back to this thing with Drew Holiday. Okay, I don't know what happened last year with this year, but Drew Holiday did not look like and feel like the same player he was last year, the same kind of impact player. A lot of the plays that we saw in a series like this against the New York Knicks, Drew Holiday would have been in the middle of. Okay. Remember, Drew Holiday was not coming in here to give you, 15 points per game, whatever, but he was making key plays. He was making key defensive stops. Tell me at what point in this series, tell me at what point, even in the Orlando Magic series, he was ever relevant for the Boston Celtics. And again, that concerned me, because this is not just about the playoffs. It's literally been through the whole course of the year. Now, I know that he's been struggling through some injuries, but even when he's come back off of those injuries, you can clearly see that he had been compromised. He'd missed point blank layups. He'd get in early foul trouble. So my thing was, to your point, if you're Joe Mazzulla, and I'm not giving Mazzulla a pass, what I'm saying is it would have been easy, because you could just basically put Drew Holiday on a Jalen Brunson, knowing that Jaylen Brown was not 100% and his knees are not going to hold up with the kind of shiftiness that you see in a player like Jalen Brunson. But you cannot tell me that even Mazzulla didn't have as much confidence to be able to let Drew be Drew, because he's never been that way really through the course of this year. You know what I'm saying? And so all of these things now kind of come together. But to your point, it's on Mazzulla to find a counter. He has got to find a counter. Now, I don't know if it's deploying another player out there, reaching desperately deep into the bench if you had to, absolutely possibly. I find it kind of interesting that Torrey Craig is on this roster, and the only time now that I see him is when they're Instagramming him wearing, numbers and dedication to Jason Tatum, but at no point was he being utilized or being deployed to help take some of that pressure off that the Celtics, I think, would have utilized and needed for that body to hold off runs or whatever the case may be. So to your point, I just think that there's a lot of, it's very discombobulated in our ability to properly assess the Celtics. Now, I don't know if this is what you call organized chaos, so that at the end of it, if they knew they weren't going to win, and this is what you could throw out of this. But hey, man, I ain't boony foo-foo, man. I am not being fooled by this. I was disappointed by how they took for granted the level of greatness they could achieve themselves to be, because I think they were misguided on what got them to where they are, and they failed to stay disciplined in the things that really shown people why we were saying, hey, they really could be a great roster altogether, because of how great they can all be flexible and multiple defenders get on multiple guys and things of that nature. But if it's going to be compromised because guys are not 100% healthy, if it's going to be compromised because guys have different motivations or different agendas about what they're trying to do through the course of the regular season and not really keep their eye on the prize here, they did themselves a disservice, especially with the way they got ousted, and especially on how they made things more challenging than it needed to be. And that goes all the way back even to the Orlando Magic series. That series became more challenging than it needed to be because they were just determined to just be who they are and not make adjustments when necessary.
I mean, I'll challenge that notion somewhat in Orlando. I think Orlando played them in a very physical way that they're not used to, and the adage that you can just rough up the Celtics, that they were able to respond, and the games were probably closer than they should have been. But I think in some ways they did try to adjust a little bit there in terms of the physicality and overcoming that. Where they didn't able to respond in the New York series was almost kind of like the elitist mentality that they kind of walked into the series with. And then when they got literally punched in the mouth 2 times in a row, we're like, oh no, we're not the mighty Celtics, and people won't cow down to us because they're down 20. Oh, all right, well, what's next? Right. But then they won game 3, kind of playing the same style. A bunch of threes kind of went in, Tatum, Brown, awesome, they do their thing. But the entirety of this time they've been compromised. And I believe what they say in terms of the locker room chemistry, that there's not agendas and egos that have clearly been a part of previous Celtics locker rooms. Comes down to heart, a better Knicks team in general, and then schemes. we do need to transition now to what's next as opposed to what was here for Boston. So you're looking at this payroll, which is immensely inflated. Al Horford is a free agent. Luke Cornett is a free agent. You're kicking in the contract now, even of Sam Hauser, which, he was injured and compromised in the latter part of the season and these playoffs as well, too. Then you have this cascading payroll and luxury tax that's coming aboard with new ownership, in tow lurking. I just think we're at the stage where Boston, with Tatum being out, what will probably be a 9 or 10 month injury. So the good part of if not all of next year, the 25-26 season from a championship perspective seems to be, I don't say lost, but there's not a high likelihood that would be the case. And then do you wait now for Tatum to come back the following year and feel like we can keep Holiday, we can keep Porzingis, we can keep White? I'll give you my short answer to that. The answer to that is no. I think what ends up happening is Porzingis and Drew Holiday get moved in some semblance of packages to maybe get back some draft capital. I don't think they're not going to tank. They're still too good to tank. But I think if you're looking for to save payroll, Holiday and Porzingis are the pieces in essence that goes. Maybe Al comes back a super team-friendly deal. Maybe he doesn't. If you're looking at his body language on the bench at the end of game 6, it looked like he was soaking it in like, all right, yeah, mofos. Like, he's going to remember this and he's going to want revenge, I think, in some pace. But at what number do you bring him back? And then I think it's a matter of, do you keep, Xavier Tillman and guys like that? I mean, all these are like supplemental pieces that are just kind of like not really doing much for you. But to me, you're building around Brown. You're building around Derek White. I think he's still too good that you're not trying to move on from him. And then obviously waiting for Tatum to come back. And in 26-27, you have the bones of a really, really good team that can still be championship level with some supplemental pieces behind it.
So you don't think that there's any likelihood that they can move pieces in order to get some of the pliable, free agents that are out there? I'm just wondering if whether or not, like, hey, there's that window of opportunity maybe to see if they can pull a Kevin Durant, right? He may still have a 1-2 year window, and you don't have to be as much in a rush, so to speak, to bring back Jason Tatum. Could possibly pair well with the Jaylen Brown, right? I somewhat agree with you. I'm a little leery about the Derek White thing. I guess in my sense, I think Derek White's a great player, and I still think there clearly can be a window if your intent is to say he is the trifecta. I think that to me is the big question. What is the trifecta for the Boston Celtics? And if that trifecta, it does it entail keeping a Derek White, or does it entail going to get someone and Derek White now becomes like that fourth person because he's been such a good lead guard for them and things of that nature that you can make it expendable? I just think it's going to be an interesting situation for the Boston Celtics in the offseason, because I cannot imagine that I don't think they want to rush Jason Tatum back. But at the same time, I don't think they want to be in a position where they lose out on a quality season, especially with the money that you just gave Jaylen Brown. I will say this, though. I'm a little surprised that the level of aggressiveness that Jaylen Brown, I thought, would have exhibited given the circumstances of what happened in the offseason with the U.S. men's basketball, the Olympic basketball situation. And, I didn't want to say much of anything because I think you make too much of it if it's all about Jason Tatum and, what he did this year, which has been phenomenally great. But I saw the edge come off of Jaylen Brown. I saw more of a quiet, very, subdued, not as aggressive Jaylen Brown that I saw going into the playoffs last year when they fully had their eye on the prize about winning this championship. And I just think it'll be interesting to see what kind of offseason Jaylen Brown decides to take. I wanted to pull out one of the, he said, yeah, losing to the Knicks is like death. I'm like, all right, well, if you feel that kind of way, right, then you know that the Celtics and the Knicks don't love each other. So going into this offseason, is the motivation about the revenge, factor that you lost to the New York Knicks? Because last year that wasn't really an issue. The New York Knicks wasn't even relevant, right? Yeah. So my thing is, okay, what's the motivation going into this offseason? Because listen, one can argue the Celtics can easily be another top 3 team in the Eastern Conference again. And whether the Knicks are going to truly be that team as well, too. I'm just saying that to me, I just want to see a much more aggressive Jaylen Brown in the offseason, putting in that work. And regardless, this is the window now for you to really say, even when Jason Tatum comes back, I'm like that guy, all around guy. I'm the big dog in the yard that like
But
does.
what does that mean? I think like we all need to define that to some degree. And I liked how the way he played in Game 5, where he was more of a point forward. He didn't feel like I needed to score 40. Like, hey, I can get and be efficient with my shots. I can drive and kick, and make the extra pass. Like, you could literally see his brain working in real time in that game. Like, no, this isn't the best shot. Let me take one dribble in, draw the defense, and then spray back out. And then when those shots are falling from the perimeter, awesome. I think if that semblance of Brown is who we get, awesome. This is not going to make sense, but I'm going to say it anyway. Remember in the days of Steph and Clay, and everyone was like, Clay can be a number one guy. Clay and Jaylen Brown are not the same. Like they're fundamentally different people, but the roles, and this is where I'm utilizing the comparison. We will now get to see in a very real way, could Jaylen Brown be a lead guy? And that lead doesn't necessarily mean he has to score 40, even 35 a night. Can it be in a way where he's efficient and ends up really getting other guys involved? And it has to come at the expense of him learning how to dribble better. We're X amount of years into where his handle looks shaky, especially under duress in the middle of the paint. Yes, he'll have a couple nice moves, has a decent Euro step as well, but that handle has got to be better, especially going into next year. And I would contend that if you bring this team back as currently constructed, don't make any moves, they can still be a top 4-5 team in the Eastern Conference, especially with the way the East is trending right now. I believe that. Not 1 or 2, but they can definitely be 4 or 5 above the play-in line. If you strip it down some, now I'd be like, all right, this is a team that's probably going to be fighting for the play-in, 6, maybe 7 type of situation. If you move Porzingis and Holiday, depending on what you get back. But Jaylen Brown's next year is going to determine truly the long-term future of this Boston Celtics team, whether or not he should be paired alongside Jason Tatum when he comes back. Because at this number, and I know we don't like to talk about it in that way, but at this number, you've got to be able to show the chops of being a true leader who can do things that doesn't always just mean scoring a bunch of points.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we'll focus our attention on a team who probably should have been in the Eastern Conference Finals, but yet again, they fall short. We'll be talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers. On the other side, don't go anywhere. We are back. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, continuing our coveted autopsy report. Time for us to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. And there's not much that can be said, man. This is becoming a trend. And it's kind of disheartening because I so much want to believe in the fact that Spider Mitchell and the Cleveland Cavaliers, they have essentially most of, if not all, the pieces to get you at least to the finals. Okay. There's no question about that. And this season, I mean, across the board, what more can be said? The only thing that's missing is, them having somebody legitimately being an MVP candidate. But, you can make the argument Spider Mitchell literally was, playing at an MVP-like kind of level with how he was able to galvanize and make this team essentially better, elevate them to another space. Collectively, as this team was about as dangerous as you could possibly have a team, like we were talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder, So to get knocked out by the Indiana Pacers, and I think, to your point, Shaw, we just talked about this with the Boston Celtics. I just feel like this team took for granted what they showed through the course of the regular season and just did not make the necessary adjustments to show the versatility of what the top team in the Eastern Conference should be doing against the lesser teams that they managed to just beat the brakes off of through the course of the regular season. And you don't have the luxury of waiting 2 weeks from now to figure it out, man. Or, your next matchup is 2 months from now. It is a 7-game series, and you only have 4 chances to get it right. And you squander 2 of those chances on your home court. Really resonates with me because it's just speaking to the fact that they're just not getting it. Now, I said all of that because it sounds really harsh, but now I want to liken this to what we were just talking about with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. How long did it take before we started seeing them really starting to figure it out? I mean, everyone's going to say, yeah, it literally took LeBron James to leave the damn Eastern Conference for them to actually figure this part of it out. But look how long it literally took them before they actually began to see, quote unquote, the fields of grandeur, right? To get to the NBA finals. Because the question for them wasn't how good they were to get to the Eastern Conference finals, is can they get over the hump to get to the finals? And look how long it took to do that, right? Are we thinking that this is going to be the same thing with this Cleveland Cavaliers team?
Listen, I didn't even say the number in the previous segment. So, but Boston has a $227 million payroll next year, right? And that was without Cornette and Harford on it. Cleveland's payroll is $217 million next year. So Mobley's extension kind of kicks in here now. You're already paying Garland, and then obviously you had just re-signed Donovan Mitchell as well too. I'm concerned, that this is a regular season only team based on even Donovan Mitchell's past. He's never been to the conference finals, which he has openly acknowledged and doesn't duck or shy away from it in any real way. The Cavs lost 3 games on their home floor in the second round. Like, that is egregious. it's egregious. And when you work that hard, get that amount of wins, and yes, they have a similar situation to Boston. Garland was battling turf toe, Mitchell had the ankle injury. Mobley had, a nagging injury as well too. I just feel like they still should have had enough, I think, with that to beat Indiana. But we have to credit the Pacers, who I've been down on from the very beginning. Nevertheless, they've proven everybody wrong at every step and every single turn. But Cleveland is in a situation here now where it's truly gut check time in terms of this organization. They sacrificed. They looked like Boston of last year, where roles were being understood. This is what we need to do. They increased the volume of 3. Donovan Mitchell took a step back. I don't need to score 30 a night or whatever. His minutes were down. Everything is Mobley that we've been wanting to see. All the things happen. They just destroyed the Miami Heat in the first round. And I think maybe that gave them a level of air of confidence. Like, all right, we'll be good. Even with game 1, it was a long layoff because we beat the Heat's ass. So, we were rusty. We don't need Garland for game 2 with the turf toe. We'll let him rest. Yikes, bro. Yikes. None of these things went the way that they thought it was. And while I don't think they are going to be, they're not going to fall into the doldrums of the Eastern Conference because the East is still the very East. They'll have a very, very good regular season record again next year. And I don't think they're going to make any fundamental changes. A full year of DeAndre Hunter, into their scheme. Awesome. They may or may not lose Ty Jerome, depending on how much money they ultimately want to pay. But they can no longer be defined by anything they do in the regular season. It is all about the postseason. And I don't have any real constructive feedback for them in terms of roster construction right now, other than this is about heart and determination at this point. And that's what they're going to need to do is gut check time next year. And I hope it's not, as I said in the last couple weeks ago, I hope it's not the same bat time, same bat channel for them, because they're better than what they showed in this year's playoffs.
Listen, Shaw, like all of this is relevant, right? I think all of it is relevant. That it's hard for you not to want this roster as it's constructed for them to run it back. I think they do need to run it back, but I'm very leery of the stigma that tends to kind of hang over a team like this that is this successful. Okay, partly because they're not used to this level of prosperity. Not since LeBron. Not since, and the last time that they did that, that's where most of these teams tend to go. They go backwards and say, man, we'll never see it like them days when we had LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Love, or, back in the Chicago days when we had Derrick Rose and, Joakim Noah and Loud. Like, I don't want that to be the case, because you have to appreciate the circumstances of how this team was constructed and how this team built. Remember, the Cleveland Cavaliers in the thick of the night stole Donovan Mitchell from going to the New York Knicks, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think Donovan Mitchell even understands, like, the ramifications of how he changed the quote-unquote narrative of what Cleveland Cavaliers basketball is like or going to be like post the LeBron era. You know what I'm saying? And so I think fans have to be a little bit more patient. But I also think as well, too, that this is now going to be up to Kenny Atkinson, because I think this is a new space for him. Remember, he's usually the person to go in there and fix and elevate things He comes in there and immediately takes this team that is, quote unquote, a respectable playoff team into, oh, snap, these guys should be one of the Eastern Conference finalists. So to fall short of that, yes, very disappointing, but he's got some leeway because I don't think that we've seen Kenny Atkinson in this space. He's usually at the beginning stages of things before organizations, get all up in their fields and try to get slick, and then they move on from him. I want to see what he does with this. I want to see how he takes what happened here and uses this, like we see what Mark Daigneault is doing with the Oklahoma City Thunder. He could have easily taken what's going on last year and, where everyone's saying that they're a one-trick pony team or they're paper number one contenders. I think people may have that same kind of sentiment, but I think it's a little bit more believable when you see the elevation now of Evan Mobley, when you see the elevation of Jarrett Allen, and you now see that they're making moves like getting a DeAndre Hunter. I think things are still in pace, and I think people need to be just a little patient. I know it's hard, given in this climate of the NBA, but the people have to be a little bit patient. Where I am concerned, though, Shaw, is now we get to this point with certain players. And I said this at the beginning of the year that I wondered about the combination of Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Okay. I need to see another level from Darius Garland. Okay. He is very much a part of why this team is successful. He was also very much a part of the reason why the Cleveland Cavaliers could not get past the Indiana Pacers. And the Indiana Pacers knew that. And so you're Darius Garland. You got to go into this offseason, man, and you have got to give people, you got to put them on notice. Last year, we saw that with Derek White and how he improved in so many different ways. And then you add Drew Holiday and his veteran leadership and his counseling allowed Derek White to essentially be the number one guard that the Celtics needed, right? And so I need to see that kind of evolution from Darius Garland, right? If that happens,
what does that look like though? Because
he
scores 20,
I still see that lack of
shoots 40%
aggressiveness,
from three.
that lack of I still feel like things still have to go through Donovan Mitchell. I would rather see Donovan Mitchell, Shaw, to be the Swiss Army knife guard. He can come in, he can do the point guard thing, but I still feel like he still has to take over. And I think that if you're Darius Garland with that kind of speed, with the ability for you to break defenses down, you have to be more aggressive. You have to rely on the fact that you are going to set the rest of your guys up. And I understand he had turf toe, but I did not nearly see, even with the turf toe shot, I still didn't even see the level of aggressiveness I would have expected to see. And the Pacers knew that. And so I'm just saying, when you're playing against your rivals, when you're playing, the regular season is a great opportunity for you to get a little bit of shine on and carry that going into the playoffs, because there's going to be a good coach who's going to find a way to counter your number one plan A. Garland has to be plan 1AA in a sense, if they're going to all, collectively be that team that I think we're thinking that they're capable of being. He's the next guy, in other words, is what I'm saying.
I would disagree, I think, with the offensive notion, to be honest with you. I think for Cleveland to take that next step that you're thinking about, I think it's incumbent upon Garland and Donovan Mitchell both to kind of lean in more into that defensive side. As the aforementioned Celtics were, I think Udoka really made Brown and Tatum understand that you need to play on both sides of the basketball and not worry about taking turns. So we got the offensive side kind of figured out this year on Cleveland because of Kenny Atkinson's schemes and, that delineation and democracy that came through the Cleveland offense and the evolution of Evan Mobley. But where teams felt like, we can still lick our chops a little bit, is in that backcourt pairing on the other side. While Garland and Mitchell are going to give it to you, they might give up just as much because they're just not as prolific defensively. And that's where I think that both of them collectively as a backcourt tandem need to focus on what does it mean to stay in front of guys or truly steer into the help of those twin towers when you have Mobley and Allen back there. And so you're not always necessarily getting beat off the dribble and having to have all that defense kind of help or then be available for drop-offs in the dunker spot and things of that nature. So that's where, where you talk about aggressiveness, that often comes at the offensive side of things. And I don't have a problem with what Garland did offensively, really, even with the turf toe, so to speak. It's just that defensive side for them is kind of a glaring liability, and hence why they got DeAndre Hunter as well, too, to try to help shore some of those things up. because right now at this point, Isaac Okoro is pretty much unplayable. Ty Jerome, when he is playable, isn't doing anything defensively. So that's where they still have some holes, even though they finished 8th in defensive rating as a team this year.
Okay, because I was gonna say, like, not to be hypocritical or nothing like that, or make it seem that it's hypocritical. We're leaning into the fact that they were a top 10 team defensively, right? But you still saw flaws defensively in them
specifically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So look, I'm not going to argue with that particular point. I think it's a legitimate point. I think where I'm just making more of the emphasis is not from a scoring perspective. I think it's the ability to break defenses down. I think maybe I just saw more of him relying too much on a shot, or taking shots, so to speak, rather than breaking defenses down, getting in the middle and mixing up things. I felt like it seemed like they were waiting more for that to happen through Donovan Mitchell than it was from Darius Garland. And to your point, I will say Darius Garland got into some silly fouls, got into easy foul trouble, really made himself unavailable. But to me, I think he is best equipped to really elevate the plays of guys like Mobley and Allen and even DeAndre Hunter with their length. But if he can get into the interior, get into the paint more, he can set those guys up to do what the offense allows it to do. Because if you're only going to allow Donovan Mitchell to do that, now you're relying on Darius Garland to space out to shoot, which I'm not as confident of a person to see Darius Garland shooting the basketball some umpteen times if it's not to penetrate in the paint and get to the foul line. So that to me is where I'm coming from that perspective. But I agree with you. I do think that especially if you're going to keep them on the floor, they have got to be a better backcourt defensive tandem against whoever their opposition is if they're going to give themselves a chance to compete in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, eventually. 3 starters. Garland, 115 defensive rating. Donovan Mitchell, 113 defensive rating. Max Strus, 115 defensive rating, right? Meanwhile, Mobley and Allen at 108. So they're clearly bolstering the defense and cleaning up for, honestly, those 3 guys who were just not at the level that a championship level team needs to be. But still, I'm not saying they didn't try this year because they did make strides. But if you're talking about that next step, that's where it needs to come from Cleveland. So for me, like I said, there's not a whole lot of roster construction and rebuilding that needs to be done here. They just got to get it done. Like they just have to look within and figure it out because they have the talent, especially with Hunter here now. Again, I'll say for a full season. And ultimately, they need to decide what they're going to do with Ty Jerome. If I was going to truly nitpick at this, when we talk about Garland, then who's the real backup point guard on this roster that you trust? And I think it's, playmaking comes from Donovan Mitchell in a very real way. But is that what you want him to be doing, when Garland is out of the game, so to speak? So, like, who's the next guy? So, could they use somebody else? I think so. They can use a backup point guard if I was going to be truly nitpicky of this Cleveland roster.
Interesting stuff, man. But, again, great season all around for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Our sentiment is don't do anything, but you got to get better. You got to get better. And you can't be this good and get knocked out, in the second round. Like, it's got to be championship finals,
Yeah, especially next year with Boston looking like they're going to have a down year, right? I mean, we don't know if it's going to happen there right now. I mean, the East truly is for the taking. And despite this Knicks run, despite this Pacers run, I look at them, as I said with Boston last year, you don't look at them and like, oh my God, we can't beat them. There's nobody looking at that right now. I think Cleveland and Boston are kicking themselves in their ass right now. Like, yo, look what happened here.
At the very least be in the
and I think the rest of the East will as well too. I mean, you look at it again. We talk about Orlando and whoever you think is next up. Detroit, even to me, unless it's like, yo, a couple of the right moves here. We can really be right in the thick of this. So Cleveland has no reason to think, since they're not going to lose Mitchell for the entirety of the year, like Boston is going to lose Tatum. Like the East could be theirs. Honestly, Milwaukee, might be fundamentally changed with Giannis out of the conference. The Cleveland Cavaliers have a real opportunity.
To your point, they're fundamentally changed because Lillard is gone, right? Like he's out for most of the year, and they were the second best team in their division. Right. So now you might make an argument. Okay, that's the opportunity for the Pacers. Well, yeah. I mean, just in the context, through most of the year, it was basically the Bucks, and then the Pacers, had that come up. But you're not looking at this Pacers team saying, "Oh, they're the next team that's going to score, that's going to give you like 60 wins." They're good. They're a solid team.
Right.
And if somehow they find them, they're like, "Oh man, we're the lucky losers, man." You know, if they get in, and we're going to talk about the Eastern Conference Finals real quick. If they get through and get to the finals, hey man, this could be it for them. This really could be it for them because you just don't know. With the way teams are structured in the Eastern Conference, you don't know whether or not you're going to get another crack at it. You literally just don't. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, Eastern Conference Finals preview. Sean and I give our takes, and then we also give our predictions. You don't want to miss it here. We're back. Cal Lee Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. That was a good autopsy, Shaw. I don't know about you, but I guess when talking about the dead so much, sometimes it's just good therapy to.
Yeah, it's been a rough week. And like I said, we care about one of those teams maybe more than the others, but at the end of the day, you know, we're trying to make sure we do what we do here and we're equitable, you know, in our assessment. And I think we were able to accomplish that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But and listen, credit to these teams. They set the standard. So it's only right. Like we have to make sure that we scrutinize them, you know, as much as possible. You know, I think a lot of people look at what happened and are instantly thinking, you got to shake things up. No. You know, Cavaliers, no, you don't need to shake it up, but you should demand better of them. Yeah. This is like, all right, now this is year 2 that they've done this, right? Okay. Year 3, no excuses, right? So there you go. All right, Shaw, let's get right into the Eastern Conference Finals. New York Knicks, Indiana Pacers. You know, a lot of people are trying to get at this, oh, it's revenge time, you know, given what happened with the Pacers knocking out the Knicks last year in the semifinals, you know, doing what they did in that Game 7, all this other kind of stuff. You know, Shaw, I'm looking at this from a completely different perspective. People might be thinking I'm being petty or, you know, feeling some kind of way about it. If you're both the Pacers and the New York Knicks, you thank your lucky stars that you've got some really good players and things just lined up as well as they did for you to make sure that when the opportunity presented itself, you did not squander it so that you can get yourself here. This is the opportunity. If you're the New York Knicks, you got to get to the finals. Listen, they are a better team as on paper, legitimately have a better team than the Indiana Pacers. However, I've seen the Indiana Pacers play better team basketball on both sides of the ball through the course of this playoff run. And I don't see anything changing of that. So if I'm Tom Thibodeau, if I'm Brunson and them guys, I have to be very careful about what my number one motivation needs to be about getting the job done to get to the finals. This does not have to be anything about more than if Brunson and Bodega and Bridges and Anunoby and Hart and all of them do what they're capable of doing, they should be able to get past this Indiana Pacers team. They should be. But I might be dreaming.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how Indiana guards Cat. That I think has been something that teams have been trying to like, hey, we'll guard him small and, you know, take our chances with that because you don't feel like he's going to bully ball his way into it. Cat's really he's really interested in celebrating. I didn't realize that about him. He's really interested in celebrating every basket. So he's got to tone that down here because it's like it's winning time, right? Like you're supposed to score the basketball, so relax. And so how Indiana now decides to do that? Do they, you know, stick a Nembhard on him as opposed to a Siakam, which would be the more natural matchup? Because I think what ended up happening, like particularly in the Boston series, is that they didn't want to have a big on them because, well, then Cat's is taking your big away from protecting the rim, so to speak. And I think obviously that's how Indiana would want to play with Miles Turner. So do you put Miles Turner on Josh Hart? You know, or you know, do you try to put him on whatever big is going to be roaming around? Like I don't know what Carlisle's going to do, but I think Carlisle's probably best suited in essence to try to scheme his way to an Indiana victory in this Eastern Conference Finals because they are getting a production throughout the entirety of their bench. You know, even with Mathurin taking a little bit of a step back from the hot start he had in the regular season, you know, we've seen him kind of tail off, but now kind of not reduced, but settling into more of a bench role. Even a guy like Ben Shepherd coming off the bench and contributing, even Thomas Bryant a little bit. But to me, that guy who's just been ridiculous as a playoff performer, and I know Tyrese Halliburton is the guy here, but Nembhard, he's rock solid, man. He's rock solid. He's locked in, and he's really got this team, playing at a level alongside Halliburton and the great work of Siakam as well, that gives this Pacers a dimension that I didn't necessarily see coming or believed in going into the playoffs.
So, well, you're welcome, Shaw. But listen, if you're the New York Knicks, you have to be concerned, because we're talking about how guys like Nembhard, guys like Miles Turner, they're all having their moment. And while Siakam, he is quietly doing a lot of the dirty work. He is quietly having a really, really solid playoffs. Let's remember, he is an NBA champion, right? He might be ready to do his best work in this Eastern Conference Finals. And this is exactly the reason why the Indiana Pacers brought him over to this team. Remember, I said it was very intriguing to see the Indiana Pacers go after and bring in Pascal Siakam, right? Whether that was a knee-jerk motion because of how the Pacers were overachieving in what they did a couple seasons ago. But now you're starting to see, when all of these components start to come together, what it's supposed to look like and what it's supposed to mean. One thing that I am going to say that I think is going to be interesting, especially when you see how Rick Carlisle deploys his roster and how Tom Thibodeau deploys his roster. Rick Carlisle has a lot more confidence in the depth of his roster than you will see with Tom Thibodeau, right? I want to see if Tom Thibodeau doesn't wait until it's absolute desperation time for him to start using the rest of that bench when certain situations deem it that he has to make an adjustment for, that he has to counter for. You know what I'm saying? I've seen Carlisle do it through the course of this playoffs already. He did that against the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? And so I want to see if whether or not Carlisle forces Tibbs to make a play, forces him to go deeper than just Deuce McBride, and a couple of other guys that Tom Thibodeau sparingly uses. And it's not because of injury, Shaw. It's because of execution. And so that, to me, is going to be the key. You can see that Carlisle can still ask of his guys to go out and execute. Even if they may not score at the same rate that his starters are scoring, he knows that from either a defensive or an offensive perspective, he's getting what he's getting from his role players. And I think that, to me, is going to be the key, because this, to me, is going to feel like an even longer 7-game series than what happened last year with the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers, just because it's going to come down to the sheer will of whether or not your starters are ready for the long haul.
Yeah, something that's interesting about the Pacers when you talk about the depth, they don't have a 20-point per game guy here in the playoffs. There's not one guy on that team averaging 20. So it truly is, depth by the depth that they have right now. Siakam leads them at 18.8. Halliburton's at 17.5. But guys are just sharing the basketball and getting it done. Neesmith has upticked his scoring to 14.6. And, I think he'll have a primarily Brunson assignment. So maybe some of his offense might go to the wayside as he's trying to guard and stay in front of Brunson through the majority part of the series. I think alongside Nembhard as well. But that, to me, is something where Indiana has a clear advantage in this. They trust more guys. And I think, even as you're alluding to with Thibodeau and Deuce McBride, can you still get the same level of production? Deuce played very well in the semifinals against the Celtics. He played very well. I think he was okay in the Pistons series, but a lot better in the Celtics one. So can you see that level of aggression and consistency here? Otherwise, like you said, you got to kind of look down that bench and say, it's like, all right, cool. Who else can we bring in here? Can Mitchell Robinson continue to be healthy, knock down free throws if they go to the Hacker Robinson strategy, but also get those second chances? Because that's where the Knicks killed Boston on the offensive boards. In this, Indiana's not a poor offensive or not a poor rebounding team. So I think that could be a little bit more even. But Mitchell Robinson gives a dimension to New York, especially if they go double bigs, that a lot of teams would have some struggles with. So Thibodeau has some things at his disposal. I think Carlisle has more, but the overall talent level in New York is a little bit higher. So that's what makes this a very intriguing series to me, to kind of see which one of those is it going to be, the depth or the talent that wins ultimately.
All right. So who do you have lined up for this series?
Yeah, as much as it's begrudging for me, I am going to pick the Knicks, and I think it will be a 7-game series. I think that they are very evenly matched. And this is me even getting off my soapbox of kind of like the Indiana distaste that I have. I think they've more than acquitted themselves in these playoffs. And I do think it's a toss-up. Like, it really could kind of go either way. But I'm just going to lean on the clutch ability of Jalen Brunson and the grit that the Knicks have shown within this. The Pacers have not been challenged. Like, they have not been challenged in this, despite, and I maybe you say that's just how good they are because they both raised the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I think they need to be. They haven't gone through the wars that the Knicks have. Even in these two series where they have been challenged, and that first series still could have went either way with Detroit. Like, I don't care what anybody says. Like, it could have went either way. And then they really kind of, I'd say, didn't dominate Boston, but they grew up against Boston in a way that I didn't see coming. So I got Knicks in 7.
I have the Knicks in 7, but I'm gonna say this: if the Indiana Pacers win one of the first 2 games in the Garden, I think the Indiana Pacers take it in 6. And I feel more strongly about the Pacers probably winning in 6 than I do about the Knicks winning. But again, I just think that the Knicks have better clutch players when asked of. It's a question of will they be healthy enough, and will they be in a position to be able to show that they're capable of doing those things. This is going to be a tough series, man. It's going to be a tough series. I think that it's no less than 6 or 7 games. But if I'm the New York Knicks, I really would not like to be in a situation where I'm giving up any of the home court advantage to the Indiana Pacers at the early outset of this playoff series. If you do that, I think you run the risk of you getting knocked out by the Pacers. And the Pacers have proven that they can go out there and they can win on the road.
But so have the Knicks, though. So that's where I don't know home court means as much as it used to. But I understand where you're going with it. I just feel like both of these teams are very good road teams that we don't necessarily need to worry about, even if Indiana were to steal game 1 or 2 in the Garden.
I hear you. Here's where I kind of differ with where you're coming from. The New York Knicks prove that they can come from behind against a team that allows teams to come from behind. The Indiana Pacers, and I think where I'm saying is if the Indiana Pacers get on top of the Knicks, I'm not talking about this being like a 2-3 game, tight game going into the final minutes. I'm saying if the Indiana Pacers go out there and mollywop the Knicks in the early outset, the Knicks are not coming back to win that game. The Indiana Pacers, I just think as far as an offensive team goes, I think they're just too good to allow a team to just suddenly just come back out of the woodworks and then they lose that game. I think Carlisle will figure out and find a way to make sure that even if the Knicks go on a run, they ain't going on a run to knock out like they did the Celtics. The Pacers will figure that out. But what I'm saying
they have more dimensions to their offense, right?
No, they do. But what I am also saying as well, too, when it comes to the New York Knicks cannot let this get out of hand, right? Because then the Pacers get in the Knicks' head. It's just a fact. The Pacers are that kind of team. They have got to be up in you. They got to be chirping. They got to be all up in your headspace. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know if the Knicks want to be messing around playing those kind of head games with the Pacers, but if I'm the New York Knicks, I have to make sure that I make a statement and I have to make sure that they understand that it's not going to be easy to just get wins in the Madison Square Garden, the MSG. Like to me, it's not about just the sacred ground of MSG. It's about the fact that you are the New York Knicks and you effectively have home court advantage because you're the 3rd best team in the Eastern Conference. Therefore, there should be no reason why you're going to allow the Indiana Pacers to destroy you on your own home court. And we have seen where the Indiana Pacers go out there and blitz teams to the point it makes them question whether or not they can hang in that series. And that's what I don't want to see. But it can happen, and it's happened.
Let me ask you one final question here. Where does Brunson spend the majority of his time defensively? Do you think he ends up guarding Nembhard or Neesmith? Because I think the cross matches on New York side, I in my head I'm figuring it out. I think Cat will start out on Turner. Anunoby is going to be guarding Siakam. I think they'll put Bridges on Halliburton, right? And then that allows Nembhard.
I think Vincent's going to be on Neesmith.
Right. And I think what ends up happening, Bridges and Neesmith will probably alternate on Brunson, cross matching where the case would be. But I think on the flip side is where does Brunson spend the most of his time trying to hide, And yeah, you're right. It might be Neesmith, but this is why we play the games, man. I'm over, the Celtics loss per se. Now I can just kind of focus on what is basketball without any rooted interest and see, what I think will be a great series between Indiana and New York.
Absolutely, man. Great show altogether, man. I mean, we covered a lot. We buried two teams, and then we found a way to talk about two teams that are staying alive, right? So, and one of those teams eventually is going to be a participant in this year's NBA Finals, and we are definitely here for it, man. So awesome show altogether, brother.
Absolutely. So please continue to tap in with the Baseline NBA podcast. We got those goods for you. Exciting conversations. We'll ramp up our coverage here a little bit as we get into the conference finals and the NBA finals ultimately. But enjoy, man. Enjoy. There's still a lot of great basketball ahead of us. We got the draft coming up as well, too. Special guests coming up on the Baseline here in a couple of weeks, too. Great time to be alive, brother, and a great time to be rocking and rolling with you, my guy.
Absolutely, man. So for the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. Thanks for hopping on board with us this week. Enjoy the Eastern Conference Finals, and we'll catch up with you next time.